They mocked his apron, a simple piece of green canvas, stained and unassuming. To the hardened Marines of Baker Company, it was a laughable eccentricity, a quirk, a reminder of a life far removed from the muck and blood of the Pacific. The man who wore it, a quiet boy from Kansas, just took the ribbing with a shrug and a small smile. But that apron, that simple piece of cloth, was about to be woven into the very fabric of Marine Corps legend. This story begins on a godforsaken island called Guadalcanal. By May of 1943, the major battles were over, but the jungle still held its breath, thick with humidity, disease, and the ever-present threat of the enemy. On the morning of May 5th, the men of Baker Company were ordered to take a piece of contested ground known only as Hill 208. It was a steep, jungle-choked ridge, a perfect defensive position, the kind of place where men's lives are spent for inches of mud. The initial assault was a brutal, chaotic affair. The Marines pushed forward, fighting for every vine, every rock. The Japanese defenders, dug in and determined, met them with a storm of machine gun fire and mortar. The jungle canopy, once a shield from the sun, was now a death trap, turning mortar shells into airbursts that rained shrapnel down on the advancing Americans. Casualties mounted with terrifying speed. Men fell, their cries swallowed by the roar of battle. The push faltered, then broke. The order was given to fall back, to regroup, to tend to the wounded who littered the bloody slope. But one man didn't get the order. Or maybe he just chose to ignore it. Alone, separated from his unit, the boy from Kansas found himself deep in enemy territory. The sounds of his retreating comrades faded, replaced by the chilling guttural shouts of the Japanese soldiers closing in. He was trapped behind enemy lines, with a handful of grenades, his trusty M1 Garand, and the green canvas apron tied around his waist. As the first enemy patrol stumbled upon his position, he didn't hesitate. A burst of fire from his Garand, and the threat was neutralized. But he knew more would come. The jungle had eyes, and now they were all focused on him. He moved not in a panic, but with a cold, calculated purpose. He became a ghost in the green hell. He'd strike from one position, melting back into the undergrowth, before the enemy could zero in on his muzzle flash. He used the terrain, the very jungle that was supposed to be his tomb, as his greatest weapon. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a predator. As the hours crawled by, a strange thing began to happen. The Japanese forces, preparing to counterattack the main American line, found themselves besieged from within their own ranks. A single phantom shooter was causing chaos, confusion, and mounting casualties. They sent out patrols to hunt him down, and those patrols simply vanished. One by one, they were drawn into the jungle and silenced. The lone Marine was a master of his craft. He knew his weapon inside and out. Every 8-round clip was a tool of deadly precision. He'd let the enemy get close, so close he could see the whites of their eyes, before opening fire. Each shot was a carefully placed message. He was here. He was not running. And he was not done. This is where the apron comes in. It wasn't a kitchen apron. It was a makeshift carrier, a piece of gear born of necessity. While others fumbled with ammo pouches and webbing, he could reload in a fluid, seamless motion, pull a fresh clip, slam it home, and get back to work. That simple piece of canvas, the one his buddies had laughed at, was now the key to his terrifying efficiency. It gave him the speed he needed to stay one step ahead of death. Throughout the day and into the night, he waged his one-man war. The Japanese commanders on Hill 208 grew increasingly frantic. Their planned counter-offensive was in disarray. How could one man pin down and dismantle entire squads? They threw everything they had at the Phantom in the jungle machine guns, mortar, wave after wave of soldiers. But he was always one step ahead, a whisper in the leaves, a flash in the dark. For the Japanese soldiers on that hill, he became more than a man. He was a demon, a spirit of the jungle sent to punish them. His relentless attacks frayed their nerves, broke their discipline, and sowed terror in their hearts. They began firing wildly into the darkness, wasting ammunition, seeing shadows move where there was only wind. By the time the sun rose on May 6th, the situation on Hill 208 had changed dramatically. The relentless pressure from the lone Marine had crippled the Japanese defenders. Their morale was shattered, their command structure was in chaos, and their numbers were significantly depleted. When Baker Company launched the renewed assault that morning, they expected another brutal, bloody grind. Instead, they found the resistance strangely weak, almost non-existent. They advanced up the slope, past the grim evidence of the previous day's fight, and found the summit eerily quiet. And there, amidst the silent, twisted bodies of the enemy, they found him, leaning against a tree, exhausted, grimy, but alive. The ground around him was a testament to the fury of his stand. He was surrounded by spent brass casings and the bodies of the dozens of enemy soldiers who had tried to silence him. His green apron, now torn and stained with the grime of battle, was empty. He had used every last round, every last grenade. He had single-handedly held off and dismantled the enemy force on Hill 208, preventing their counterattack and paving the way for his company to take the objective with minimal further losses. When the final count was made, the number of enemy dead attributed to his actions was staggering. It was a feat so incredible, so beyond the scope of what one man should be able to do, that it bordered on the unbelievable. The men of Baker Company no longer saw a quirky boy from Kansas. They saw a giant. The mocking jokes about his kitchen apron died on their lips, replaced by a quiet, profound awe. That simple piece of green canvas was no longer a sign of eccentricity. It was a badge of honor, a symbol of one of the most incredible displays of individual bravery in the entire Pacific War. His name would be etched into the annals of the Marine Corps. His story, the story of the lone Marine on Hill 208, would be told and retold, a testament to the unyielding spirit of a single soldier who, when faced with impossible odds, refused to break. He stood his ground, fought with everything he had, and enacted a price in blood so high that it turned the tide of a battle. And he did it all with a little help from his unassuming, stained, and utterly legendary green apron. Thank you for watching. If you found this story of incredible courage as inspiring as we did, please hit that like button, subscribe for more stories of unsung heroes, and share this video to ensure their legends are never forgotten. We'll see you in the... This isn't just a war story. Our story begins in the suffocating heat and mud of Guadalcanal in late 1942. He was a machine gunner, a master of his craft, and his craft was the Browning M1917, a heavy, water-cooled beast of a weapon. On the night of October 24th, the jungle erupted. The Japanese 3rd Infantry Regiment, a force of about 3,000 battle-hardened soldiers, launched a furious assault directly at Barcelone's position. The air was torn apart by screams, explosions, and the terrifying sound of a Banzai charge. Barcelone commanded 2 machine gun sections, a total of 16 men. Almost immediately, the Japanese attack overran one of his gun pits, killing or wounding their American line. Without a moment's hesitation, this thing weighed over 90 pounds with its tripod and water. It was a crew-served weapon for a reason. But Barcelone, fueled by pure adrenaline, hoisted it onto his back and sprinted through the storm of enemy fire to the threatened flank. He set up the gun and single-handedly began laying down a devastating field of fire, mowing down the charging Japanese soldiers and plugging the hole in the line. The night was a blur of chaos. The Japanese came in relentless waves. Barcelone seemed to be everywhere at once. He ran from gun to gun, clearing jams, replacing barrels that glowed red-hot, and redistributing ammunition to the guns that were still firing. The noise was deafening, the flashes of gunfire and grenades illuminating scenes straight out of hell. At one point, a runner tried to get ammunition to his position, but was cut down. Barcelone fought his way through the enemy, grabbed the ammo, and fought his way back. He was a one-man supply line under constant fire. The enemy was so close he was fighting them off with his pistol and even his bare hands. For nearly 48 hours, with barely a moment's rest, John Barcelone held his ground. The Japanese threw everything they had at him. Mortar rained down, grenades exploded all around him, and waves of infantry charged again and again. But Barcelone and the handful of Marines left with him refused to break. He kept his guns firing, becoming a pillar of defiance in the center of the storm. When the sun finally rose on October 26th, the scale of the carnage was revealed. The ground in front of Barcelone's position was a carpet of fallen Japanese soldiers. The assault was broken. Of the 3,000 attackers, only a handful survived. Of Barcelone's 16-man section, only he and 2 other Marines were left standing, able to fight. He had personally fired his machine guns for nearly 2 straight days, until the last of his ammunition was gone. His hands were burned from handling the scorching hot barrels. He was utterly exhausted, but he had held the line. He had saved his battalion, and quite possibly the entire American position on Guadalcanal. His actions were so extraordinary, so far beyond the call of duty, that there was only one recognition suitable: the Medal of Honor. John Barcelone became the first enlisted Marine in World War II to receive the nation's highest award for valor. He was a hero, an icon. But here's where the story takes a turn. The Marine Corps, recognizing his incredible propaganda value, sent him home. He was a national celebrity, greeted with parades, and sent on a war-bond tour across the country. He was shaking hands with politicians and movie stars, a far cry from the mud and blood of Guadalcanal. Most men would have accepted this role. Stay home, be a hero, and survive the war. But that wasn't John Barcelone. He was a Marine. He felt guilty being celebrated while his brothers were still fighting and dying in the Pacific. He told his superiors, "I'm a plain soldier. I want to be back with my outfit." He felt like a museum piece, and he hated it. He repeatedly requested to return to combat. The Marine Corps finally relented on one condition: he couldn't go back to his old unit, the 7th Marines. They couldn't risk losing their poster boy. So, he was assigned to the newly formed 5th Marine Division, tasked with training new Marines for the meat grinder of the Pacific War. He could have stayed stateside as an instructor, but he insisted on going with his men when they shipped out. In February 1945, Gunnery Sergeant John Barcelone found himself sailing towards a volcanic island that would become a legendary battlefield, Iwo Jima. He was leading a platoon of young machine gunners, men he had trained himself. On D-Day, February 19th, Barcelone and his men hit Red Beach 2. The landing was a catastrophe. The beach was a chaotic kill zone, swept by heavy artillery and machine gun fire from fortified Japanese positions, especially the formidable blockhouse on the right flank. Marines were being cut down, pinned on the black volcanic sand, unable to advance. Units were disorganized. Leadership was breaking down under the intense fire. Seeing his young Marines frozen with fear, Barcelone took charge. He got his men off the beach, yelling encouragement and directing their fire. He moved with a complete disregard for his own safety, leading them on a flanking maneuver around the main blockhouse. Single-handedly, he attacked the heavily fortified position with grenades and demolitions, destroying it and the Japanese troops inside. His actions cleared the way for the pinned-down units to finally move inland. He wasn't done. He then guided a crippled American tank through a minefield under intense fire, saving the crew and their vehicle. But his luck was running out. While moving along the edge of the airfield, a Japanese mortar shell exploded nearby. John Barcelone was killed instantly. He was 28 years old. He had been on Iwo Jima for only a matter of hours. John Basilone died as he had lived, leading from the front, taking care of his men. For his actions on Iwo Jima, he was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross, the nation's second highest award for valor. He is the only enlisted Marine in history to receive both the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross. His story is more than just about medals. It's about a man who had a choice. He could have stayed home, safe, a celebrated hero, but he chose to return to the hell of combat, to be with his fellow Marines. He chose duty and brotherhood over fame and safety. He embodied the Marine Corps' motto, Semper Fidelis, always faithful. Faithful to his country, faithful to the Corps, and most of all, faithful to the men fighting alongside him. Today, his name is legendary within the Marine Corps. A destroyer is named after him, as are roads and buildings on Marine bases. But his greatest legacy is the standard he set. The standard of courage, of leadership, and of selfless sacrifice. So the next time you hear about heroes, remember Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone, the man who held the line on Guadalcanal, and who chose to give everything for his men on the black sands of Iwo Jima. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as inspiring as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of incredible individuals from history. Let us know in the comments what other heroes you'd like to see us cover. See you next time. Ever wonder what true grit looks like? Picture this. It's 1943, the Pacific Ocean. The fight for Guadalcanal, a 6-month-long nightmare in the jungle, is reaching its bloody climax. The U.S. Marines have grabbed a vital airfield, Henderson Field, but the Japanese are throwing everything they have to get it back. The key to holding the line is a series of rugged, jungle-choked ridges overlooking the American positions. Holding one of these crucial ridges is the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. And in that battalion is a man who would become a legend, Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone. He was a 26-year-old from Raritan, New Jersey, and he wasn't new to this life. He'd already served 3 years in the U.S. Army in the Philippines before becoming a Marine. They called him Manila John, and he was as tough as they come. On the night of October 24th, 1942, under a torrential downpour, the Japanese launched a massive assault. Wave after wave of soldiers from the elite Sendai Division charged the American lines. Basilone was in command of 2 heavy machine gun sections, positioned right in the path of the main attack. The world exploded into a chaos of muzzle flashes, screams, and the constant, deafening roar of machine guns. One of Basilone's gun crews was wiped out almost immediately. Without a moment's hesitation, he hoisted the 90-pound machine gun and its tripod onto his own shoulders and ran through a hail of bullets to a better firing position. He got the gun roaring again, single-handedly plugging a dangerous gap in the defensive line. As the night wore on, the fighting became desperate. Ammunition was running low. The guns were overheating. At one point, a Japanese soldier threw a grenade that landed right next to one of his gun pits. Basilone, with ice in his veins, grabbed it and threw it back just before it exploded. The battle raged for what felt like an eternity. Basilone was a whirlwind of motion. He was firing the machine gun, then sprinting back to the rear lines, dodging enemy fire to drag up more ammunition belts. The barrels of his guns glowed red-hot and jammed. With his bare hands burning his flesh in the process, he cleared the stoppages and got them firing again. He was everywhere at once, a one-man army holding back the tide. His runners were cut down trying to resupply him. So Basilone did it himself, again and again. He fought with his machine gun. He fought with his pistol. And when the enemy got too close, he fought with a machete. He was the anchor, the rock that refused to break. The men around him, inspired by his incredible courage, held their ground with a ferocity that matched his own. By dawn, the attack finally broke. The ground in front of Basilone's position was a horrific sight, piled with the bodies of nearly 1,000 enemy soldiers. Barcelona and his few surviving men had held the line. For his extraordinary heroism that night, John Barcelona was awarded the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest award for valor. He was the first enlisted Marine in World War II to receive it. But Barcelona's story doesn't end there. He was sent back to the United States as a hero, used to sell war bonds. Crowds cheered for him, parades were held in his honor, and he was offered a comfortable commission as an officer, safe from the front lines. But Manila John wasn't built for parades. He felt a deep sense of guilt, enjoying the safety of home while his brothers were still fighting and dying in the Pacific. He refused the commission. He turned down a safe instructor role. He requested repeatedly and forcefully to return to the fleet, to get back into the fight. He said, "I'm a plain soldier, and I want to stay one." The Marine Corps finally relented. They knew you couldn't keep a man like that on a leash. So, in early 1945, Sergeant Barcelona found himself back in the heart of the storm, this time on the black volcanic sands of another island hell, Iwo Jima. He was leading a machine gun platoon in the first wave of the assault on Red Beach. The landing was a catastrophe. The Marines were pinned down by a storm of fire from heavily fortified Japanese blockhouses. Casualties mounted with terrifying speed. The advance stalled, but Barcelona, true to form, refused to be pinned down. He got off the beach, worked his way around the flank of the enemy positions, and systematically took out a key blockhouse with grenades and demolitions. Then, under constant withering fire, he guided a trapped American tank through a minefield, saving its crew and getting its firepower back into the fight. He was leading, inspiring, and fighting with the same ferocity he'd shown on Guadalcanal. He was turning the tide of a local battle almost single-handedly, getting his men moving inland off that deadly beach. And then it happened. As he was moving along the edge of an airfield, a Japanese mortar shell exploded nearby. Shrapnel tore through him. Gunnery Sergeant John Barcelona, the hero of Guadalcanal, the man who came back, was killed in action. He was 28 years old. For his actions on Iwo Jima, he was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor. John Barcelona is the only enlisted Marine in history to receive both the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross. His story is more than just a tale of battlefield heroics. It's a story about duty, about loyalty to the men by your side, and about a kind of courage that is almost impossible to comprehend. He could have stayed home, a celebrated hero. He chose to go back. He chose to lead from the front. He chose to be with his Marines. He wasn't a superhero. He was a baker's son from New Jersey, who became a symbol of the unwavering spirit of the United States Marine Corps. His legacy lives on, not just in medals and ceremonies, but in the standard he set for all who followed. He was, and always will be, a Marine's Marine. We read diving into the story of a man whose legend was forged not just in the fires of battle, but in the grease and grime of relentless preparation. This is the story of Gunnery Sergeant John Barcelona, a name that echoes through the halls of Marine Corps history. But before he was a legend, he was a man with a strange habit, a habit that made him a laughingstock. Our story begins in the tense, humid jungles of Guadalcanal in 1942. The fate of the Pacific War hangs in the balance. Here, we find a man named John Barcelona, the leader of a machine gun section in Baker Company. To his men, he was simply Manila John. He wasn't a general or a high-ranking officer. He was a sergeant, a tough, no-nonsense NCO who was fiercely protective of the young men under his command. He was the kind of leader who led from the front, who shared every hardship, and who demanded nothing from his men that he wouldn't do himself, 10 times over. Manila John's world revolved around a singular piece of machinery, the M1917 Browning water-cooled machine gun. Now, for those of you not familiar with World War II hardware, this wasn't just a gun. It was a beast. Weighing over 40 pounds, it was a heavy, crew-served weapon that could spit out over 600 rounds of 30 caliber ammunition per minute. Its sustained fire was devastating, capable of cutting down enemy charges and pinning down entire companies. The secret to its relentless power was a water-filled jacket surrounding the barrel, which prevented it from overheating and melting into a useless lump of steel. Think of it as the heavy-duty, industrial-strength backbone of the infantry's defense. But this powerful weapon had a critical vulnerability. It wasn't the gun itself, but the men who operated it. The M1917 required a team, a well-oiled human machine, to match its mechanical precision. You had the gunner, who aimed and fired. The assistant gunner, whose job was to feed the 250-round fabric ammunition belts smoothly into the weapon, a task requiring immense focus under fire. And then you had the ammunition bearers, young Marines whose job was to lug heavy cans of ammo and water for the cooling jacket, all while under enemy fire. If any part of this team faltered, the gun fell silent. And a silent machine gun on Guadalcanal was a death sentence. John Basilone understood this better than anyone. He wasn't just a gunner. He was a master of his craft. He knew the Browning with an intimacy that bordered on the artistic. He could strip it down and reassemble it blindfolded. He knew the distinct sound of a perfectly functioning firing cycle, and he could diagnose a jam just by the slight change in its rhythm. To him, the M1917 wasn't just a tool of war. It was an extension of his will and the primary shield protecting his men. This dedication led him to become a perfectionist. He was relentless, constantly drilling his crews, timing their setup and breakdown procedures, pushing them to shave off precious seconds that could mean the difference between life and death. He was a stickler for maintenance. He believed that a clean gun was a reliable gun, and a reliable gun was a live Marine. And this is where our story takes a strange turn. It was this very dedication that led to mockery. Maintaining the Browning was a dirty, messy job. The gun was coated in a thick layer of cosmoline for shipping, a heavy-grade rust inhibitor that was a nightmare to remove. Then there was the constant application of oil and grease to keep the moving parts lubricated. This grime would get everywhere, staining uniforms, embedding itself under fingernails, and becoming a permanent part of a machine gunner's life. Basilone, ever practical, found a simple solution. To protect his uniform from the constant exposure to grease and oil, he took to wearing a common cook's apron. Imagine it, a simple, plain white apron, the kind you'd see on a mess hall cook flipping pancakes. In the hypermasculine, tough-as-nails culture of the United States Marine Corps in 1942, this was unusual, to say the least. Picture the scene. A group of battle-hardened Marines, covered in mud and sweat, cleaning their rifles. And there in the middle is their sergeant, Manila John, the toughest NCO they know, meticulously cleaning his machine gun while wearing a cook's apron. The joke started almost immediately. He was called the baker, or asked if he was going to bake a cake after he was done cleaning his gun. It was an object of ridicule, a symbol of domesticity in a world defined by brutal martial values. Other Marines would snicker as he walked by, his apron a stark white flag of strangeness in a sea of olive drab. But Basilone was unfazed. He wasn't trying to make a statement. He wasn't trying to be different. He was a pragmatist. A clean uniform was a matter of discipline, and the apron was simply the most effective tool for the job. He would shrug off the jokes with a wry smile and get back to work, his focus entirely on the intricate mechanisms of his beloved Brownings. His men, while perhaps joining in the gentle ribbing, also saw the underlying message. Their sergeant cared so much about the readiness of their weapons that he was willing to endure a little ridicule. His seriousness was infectious. They saw his meticulous attention to detail, and they mirrored it. His crews became the most efficient, their guns the most reliable in the company. The laughter wouldn't last long. Soon the jokes would fade, replaced by a deep and abiding respect, a respect that would be sealed in blood and gunpowder. The night of October 24th, 1942, would change everything. Under a moonless sky, thousands of Japanese soldiers from the elite Sendai Division launched a massive frontal assault on the Marine lines, directly aimed at Barcelona's section. The air erupted. The terrifying, high-pitched screams of banzai filled the night as waves of enemy soldiers charged forward. Barcelona's 2 machine gun pits opened up, their rhythmic hammering a steady beat against the chaotic symphony of battle. For hours, they poured a relentless stream of fire into the charging ranks. But the enemy kept coming. The barrels of the guns glowed red, even with the water boiling away in the cooling jackets. Then, disaster. One of the guns jammed. In the pitch black, under a hail of grenades and mortar fire, the crew struggled to clear it. Without missing a beat, Barcelona ran to the malfunctioning gun. With the enemy just yards away, he worked by feel, his hands moving with the familiar, practiced grace of a surgeon. He cleared the stoppage, got the gun back into the fight, and then noticed the crew of the other gun were all dead or wounded. For the next 48 hours, with barely a moment's rest, John Barcelona put on a display of raw courage and endurance that defies belief. He ran a one-man supply line, dashing through enemy fire to fetch more ammunition for his depleted gun crews. At one point, he picked up the 40-pound machine gun, plus its tripod, and ammunition, and single-handedly moved it to a better firing position to support another part of the line. He repaired guns on the fly, redistributed ammo, and when his own ammunition was almost gone, he used his pistol and a machete to fight off Japanese soldiers who had broken through his perimeter. By the time the sun rose, the ground in front of his position was a horrific testament to the night's fighting. Hundreds of enemy soldiers lay dead, cut down by the relentless fire of his machine guns. Of his 15-man section, only Barcelona and 2 other wounded Marines were left standing. He had held the line. He had saved the flank. He had done the impossible. That apron no longer seemed so funny. The man they called the baker had cooked up a recipe for victory, using ingredients of pure grit, expertise, and unimaginable bravery. His meticulous preparation, the very thing that earned him ridicule, had been the bedrock of his section's survival. His guns didn't fail him because he had never failed them. For his actions on Guadalcanal, Gunnery Sergeant John Barcelona was awarded the Medal of Honor, the United States' highest military decoration. He was sent home a hero, his face splashed across newspapers and newsreels. He went on a war bond tour, a living symbol of American courage. But Barcelona was a Marine's Marine. The parades and the fame felt hollow to him. He felt his place was back with his men, back in the fight. He voluntarily requested to return to combat. And in February 1945, he found himself once again in the first wave of an amphibious assault, this time on the black sands of Iwo Jima. Leading his men off the beach, he single-handedly destroyed an enemy blockhouse before being killed by mortar fire. He died as he had lived, leading from the front, a sergeant to the very end. The story of Manila John Barcelona is more than just a tale of battlefield heroics. It's a lesson in the nature of true strength. It teaches us that excellence is born from dedication, that preparation is the foundation of success, and that true confidence means you do and care what others think when you're refocused on your mission. That simple cook's apron is a powerful symbol. It represents a commitment to one's craft so deep that superficial mockery is meaningless. It's a reminder that the seeds of greatness are often sown in the mundane, tedious, and unglamorous work that no one else wants to do. So the next time you see someone engrossed in their work, perfecting their skill, don't be so quick to judge. You might just be looking at a hero in the making, The oppressive silence was broken only by the drip of water from leaves and the occasional nervous cough. Radio intercepts and patrol reports had been hinting at a major movement for days. The Japanese were coming. Tonight, on the island of Guadalcanal, history would be forged in mud and blood. The men of the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, dug in along a ridge, knew a storm was brewing. Among them was a man whose name would become legend. Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone. Basilone moved among his 2 machine gun crews, his face grim in the faint light. He wasn't just a sergeant. He was the bedrock of this position. His men, many of them barely out of their teens, looked to him for more than just orders. They looked to him for confidence, for a sign that they would make it through the night. He checked the water levels in the cooling jackets of the heavy Browning machine guns, tested the traversing and elevation mechanisms, and ensured the cloth ammunition belts were stacked neatly, ready to be fed into the hungry breeches. He positioned his guns for interlocking fields of fire, creating a lethal kill zone across the bare, muddy approach to their section of the line. His apron, now damp and stained with mud, went unnoticed. Every detail mattered. Every second spent in preparation was a second bought in the coming fight. The first wave hit just after 10 p.m. But the Japanese were relentless. They came in waves, climbing over the bodies of their fallen comrades. One of Basilone's gun crews was hit. A grenade landed nearby, and the gun fell silent, its crew either dead or wounded. The carefully constructed kill zone was now dangerously compromised. The enemy began to pour through the gap, threatening to overwhelm the entire position. Without hesitation, Basilone made a decision that would define his legacy. He hoisted a 90-pound Browning machine gun onto his shoulders. It was a weapon designed to be operated by a crew of 4, but in that moment, Basilone was an army of 1. Ignoring the searing heat from the gun barrel that would later leave severe burns on his hands and arms, he ran. He ran through a hail of enemy fire, through the mud and the carnage, to the crumbling flank of the line. He set up the gun alone and began to lay down a curtain of suppressive fire. His actions were a beacon of raw courage, plugging the gap and inspiring the battered Marines around him to rally. The battle raged for 2 days. Basilone seemed to be everywhere at once. When ammunition ran low, he didn't just send a runner. He went himself. He fought his way through infiltrated enemy lines, dodging bullets and grenades to resupply his desperate gunners. He returned carrying crates of ammunition, his body straining under the weight, but his spirit unbroken. He cleared jams, replaced barrels, and directed fire, all while firing his own pistol and hurling grenades at the enemy who had broken through. At one point, he single-handedly held off a charge with nothing but his Colt .45 and a machete. He was a force of nature, a one-man whirlwind of destruction that refused to let the line break. By the dawn of the 3rd day, the assault had finally been broken. The ground in front of Basilone's position was a testament to the ferocity of the fighting, littered with the bodies of hundreds of enemy soldiers. Of his 15-man section, only Basilone and 2 other men were left standing. He had fought for nearly 48 hours straight, without sleep, without food, without respite, fueled by pure grit and a profound sense of duty to the men beside him. For his extraordinary heroism and conspicuous gallantry, John Basilone was awarded the Medal of Honor, the United States' highest military decoration. He was the first enlisted Marine in World War II to receive the honor. But for Basilone, the adulation was uncomfortable. He became a national hero, sent home to help sell war bonds. He was greeted with parades, celebrity handshakes, and cheering crowds. Yet, he felt a deep sense of guilt. He was safe in America, while his brothers in arms were still fighting and dying in the Pacific. He couldn't stand being a symbol. He was a Marine, a rifleman, a machine gunner, so he did something unheard of. He turned down a commission as an officer and a comfortable stateside assignment. he requested to return to the fight. His superiors were shocked, but Basilone was adamant. He famously said, "I'm a plain soldier. I want to be with my boys." The Marine Corps honored his request. His journey led him to Camp Pendleton, California, where he was assigned to train new Marines. It was there he met Lena Mai Ritchie, a sergeant in the Marine Corps Women's Reserve. They fell in love and married in July 1944. Their time together was short, a brief, happy interlude in a world at war. Lena knew his heart was with his fellow Marines, and she supported his inevitable return to combat. In February 1945, Basilone landed on the beaches of Iwo Jima. It was D-Day, and he was leading a machine gun platoon. The landing beach, codenamed Red Beach 2, was a vortex of death. The men were pinned down by a torrent of fire from heavily fortified Japanese blockhouses. Mortar shells rained down, and casualties mounted with terrifying speed. The advance had stalled before it even began. Once again, John Basilone rose to the occasion. Seeing his men faltering, he took command. He moved along the beach, under intense fire, rallying his terrified young Marines. He guided a tank through a minefield and directed its fire to destroy a key enemy blockhouse. Then, he single-handedly attacked another, flanking it and destroying it with grenades and demolitions. He had broken the stalemate, creating a path off the beach. With the route open, he turned to guide his men inland. But just as he was urging them forward, an enemy mortar shell landed nearby. Shrapnel tore through the air, and Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone fell. He was 28 years old. John Basilone's story is more than just a tale of battlefield heroics. It is a story about the true meaning of leadership, sacrifice, and loyalty. He was a hero, not just for what he did, but for who he was. He was the man who turned his back on fame to return to his duty. The man who cared more about the Marines to his left and right than his own life. His actions on Guadalcanal and Iwo Jima saved countless American lives and inspired a nation. Today, his name is honored on a U.S. Navy destroyer, on streets, and on buildings. But his true monument is in the spirit of the United States Marine Corps, a spirit of courage, honor, and commitment he so perfectly embodied. He was, and remains, a legend. Manila John Basilone, a hero for the ages. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as inspiring as we do, please hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories of incredible individuals, and share this video to help keep the memory of heroes like John Basilone. The mockery had ceased. Every man was wrapped in his own private thoughts, the fear a cold knot in his stomach. The jungle, once a cacophony of chirps and rustles, had fallen into an unnerving silence. It was the kind of quiet that precedes a storm, a silence that screamed of impending violence. At 0130 hours, the first probing attacks began. Shadows flitted between the massive trees, moving with a supernatural speed. A burst of rifle fire would tear through the night here, followed by the dull, heavy crump of a grenade there. The Japanese were testing the line, searching for a seam, a weak spot they could exploit. The Marines, dug in and resolute, responded with disciplined, measured volleys. They were holding their main fire, conserving ammunition, refusing to give away their full strength. Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone, his hand resting calmly on the cool steel pistol grip of his Browning machine gun, watched and waited. His eyes, accustomed to the dark, scanned the hellish landscape. He knew this was just the overture, the first few notes of a symphony of destruction. By 0300, the main assault erupted with the sudden, overwhelming fury of a tropical storm. A single flare shot into the sky, bursting into a brilliant magnesium white star. It hung there for a moment, casting an eerie, ghostly light over the nightmare scene below. And then they came. Not in small, probing groups this time, but in a relentless human wave. A tide of men, bayonets fixed, screaming banzai, surged from the tree line. They poured across the open ground, a living, breathing torrent of flesh and steel aimed directly at the Marine positions. The air filled with the deafening roar of battle. Machine guns chattered, rifles cracked, and mortar coughed, sending shells arcing through the smoky air. The ground trembled with the explosions. It was a maelstrom of chaos and death, illuminated by the flickering demonic light of flares and muzzle flashes. Barcelone opened up. The Browning M1917 bucked in his hands, a beast unleashed. He didn't fire in long, uncontrolled bursts. He was a master of his craft. Short, precise 4 to 5 round bursts raked across the advancing enemy, scything through their ranks. He was the anchor of the left flank of C Company, his 2 machine gun crews, the linchpin holding the entire line together. He moved between his 2 gun pits, a man possessed by a cold, deadly focus. He shouted encouragement to his men, his voice cutting through the din. He cleared jams, he reloaded belts, he directed their fire, all while firing his own weapon with devastating accuracy. The Japanese soldiers were brave, almost suicidally so. They fell in droves, but for every man that went down, 2 more seemed to take his place. They climbed over the bodies of their own comrades, their only goal to reach the Marine lines. Suddenly, one of Barcelone's gun crews went silent. A grenade had landed in their pit. Barcelone didn't hesitate. He grabbed the scorching hot barrel of the machine gun, a weapon that weighed nearly 100 pounds with its tripod and water jacket, and heaved it onto his shoulder. Ignoring the searing pain as the metal burned through his uniform and into his flesh, he ran. He sprinted through a hail of bullets and shrapnel, carrying the heavy weapon as if it were a toy. He reached the other gun pit, which had been knocked out of action, and set up the gun. He cleared the dead and wounded, got the weapon operational again, and began pouring fire back into the enemy, plugging the gap in the line. His hands were now a mess of burns and blisters, but he didn't even notice. Adrenaline and sheer willpower coursed through him. The line had to hold. It would hold. The attack was relentless. For hours, the Japanese threw themselves at the Marine defenses. They were like waves crashing against a rock, breaking and receding, only to gather strength and crash again. Barcelone seemed to be everywhere at once. When his men's ammunition ran dangerously low, he knew he couldn't wait for resupply. He had to get it himself. He grabbed a pistol and a machete. Leaving his machine gun, he fought his way back through the jungle, a one-man army carving a path through enemy soldiers who had infiltrated the lines. He moved like a phantom in the dark, a blur of motion and violence. He reached the supply dump, loaded himself up with belts of ammunition, and fought his way back to his men. It was a journey through hell, but he made it. He returned to his gun pits, his arms laden with the precious belts of .30 caliber rounds, his presence a jolt of renewed hope for his exhausted Marines. As the night wore on, the ferocity of the battle only intensified. The barrels of the machine guns glowed cherry red from the continuous firing. One of Barcelone's guns jammed, a stoppage that couldn't be cleared in the heat of battle. It was useless. At the same time, the other gun was destroyed by a direct mortar hit. For a moment, it seemed like the flank would collapse. The Japanese, sensing a weakness, surged forward. But Barcelone wasn't done. He was a gunnery sergeant of the United States Marine Corps, and he would not break. He grabbed his Colt M1911 pistol. With just that, .45 caliber handgun and a few grenades, he stood his ground against the onrushing wave. He fired with calm precision, taking down enemy soldiers at close range. He was a solitary figure of defiance against a tide of death. His leadership was magnetic. Inspired by his incredible bravery, the riflemen of his platoon rallied around him, forming a wall of fire that finally, miraculously, repelled the assault. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, The Japanese attacks faltered. The fury of their assault was spent. The human wave had broken. The eerie silence returned to the jungle, but this time it was a silence filled with the groans of the wounded and the smell of cordite and death. The ground in front of Basilone's position was a horrifying carpet of bodies. Over 1,000 enemy soldiers lay dead. He and his small band of Marines had held the line. Basilone, his uniform shredded, his hands horribly burned, his face black with gunpowder, stood among the carnage. He had personally accounted for scores of enemy dead. For his extraordinary heroism and conspicuous gallantry, John Basilone would be awarded the Medal of Honor. He was the only enlisted Marine in World War II to receive both the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross. But on that bloody night on Guadalcanal, he wasn't thinking about medals. He was just a Marine, doing his duty, holding the line. A man who became a legend, forged in the crucible of battle. John Basilone, a hero for the ages. Thank you for watching.